us on Patreon to hear us chanting stupid things.
Once we get a
That could
Patreon.
get taken the wrong way.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Palladian Papists. I'm James.
I'm Nathan.
And I may or may not possibly, slightly with a touch of all-core difficulty, still be Riley.
Yes. Yeah, welcome to another episode. This week's topic, we're going to do kind of a Thomistic objections to our own argument episode today. We're going to be discussing last week we talked about video games being art and the good we can draw from them. This week is going to be a little more focused on some of the dangers associated with video games.
Indeed. And I'm sure that certain of you out in the audience who might not be so familiar with games are probably like, yes, vindication.
Video games cause violence.
Video games are just a waste of time. You know, I've seen my friends, my
Read a
kids, whatever, just get sucked into them and have no life because of it. And it's really affecting them spiritually. So I think that there is certainly some merit to those ideas. And so that's kind of the point of this discussion, is to also recognize that while we think video games are pretty sweet, there is some potential harm to them.
Mm-hmm.
As with anything, if done to excess, it can cause problems.
Yep.
Virtue is the balance between two extremes. So, I guess to kick things off, let's see. What was one of the dangers we were talking about as we were getting ready for this? It was I guess mindlessly playing video games for the sheer pleasure of it and not truly appreciating the game for what it is like one of the dangers of playing video games. Or you just kind of veg out and play whatever game it is that you play for hours on end just to sort of escape from life, and which a lot of people actually say is like one of the primary motives for playing video games. I tend to push back a bit on that. It's not about escaping life so much as it is enjoying something that's good. And sure, it can be like a pastime, something you do to relax, but I don't think the point is to escape from life, but to rather supplement it with things. So if you're trying to like bury yourself in a video game to try to like drown your sorrow, in concept, it's not unlike an alcoholic trying to drown out their woes or what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And while the occasional escapism isn't entirely bad, right? Just the story and immersing yourself in a work of art, right? But doing it to escape your life, your responsibilities, your life.
Things like, maybe interiorly you should be praying about instead of trying to forget about.
Right.
Yeah. So I think one of the major dangers with that sort of encourages this kind of escapist behavior is there's a model of game design, or there's a couple of models of game design that are sort of by design trying to draw you in and get you to play hours and hours at a time. So take, for example, something like World of Warcraft, or any MMO, really. There's basically an infinite amount of stuff you can do, but, I mean, so there's like limits on how much one person can do on one account in a given week. So they place limits on the really powerful stuff to try to discourage you from doing that. But then people will go and make like 9 or 10 characters so that they can continuously go through and get those powerful rewards. So like, here's an example of a game design pattern that's trying to discourage you from spending too much time on it and kind of making it so that you're limited in what you can accomplish, but people circumvent it by doing something else entirely. So, what are some other design patterns that are predatory and how much they encourage you to play? Things with any kind of infinite scaling, so that you as you continue to get rewards for doing something, there's no diminish in the returns. That's a design pattern that can be very dangerous, and there's lots of things out there like that.
Mm-hmm.
especially games with like competitive ladders
Right.
where you have basically you're competing against everyone in your region. So you could probably play until Kingdom Come if you are not the number one person on the number one ranked person. So
Mhm.
those sorts of things have the potential by their nature to suck you in and keep you playing with all of your all of your free time.
Yeah, there's like a Are you guys familiar with the term a Skinner box?
Nope.
It's like a
I've heard it
psychology
before.
thing. I've heard it before.
Wait, no. Yeah, I remember
It's
this.
a psychology thing, isn't that?
Yeah.
Is that the one where you teach a rat to push a button and give it food, and it'll push the button over and over?
Yeah. That
Yeah.
was the basic process. Yeah, where it was just like to the point, where it was just sort of an automatic reaction where it's like, oh, if I do this thing, I will get pleasure. So
Yeah, there are games specifically designed like that to entice people to just sink time and money into it.
particularly like mobile games are really bad about this. It's like
That's all they have.
they're like designed to behave in a similar way to like slot machines and stuff at casinos, where you get the flashing lights and like, trigger the dopamine hit and try to get you to keep coming back for more. But ultimately costing you time and money, depending on what the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Other things too can be continuing with like competitive games example, like sometimes limited time events I've noticed, at least from what I've played, are like, where it's like, oh, okay, I've got to like grind to get this thing. But even though like this event where you might get this reward lasts like a week, you really only have like a few days maybe that you can realistically spend time on it. But then during those few days, you blow a lot of time playing to get this little reward in a video game that could have probably been better spent elsewhere. Things like that. Those are some game features, I guess, that come to mind. It's also very much a mindset thing.
Yeah.
Right.
The thing is that the way we try to approach games is as an act of leisure. So for those of you who might not be familiar, leisure, when we use this term, is sort of referring to Josef Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, how he would define leisure as sort of a way to experience God through the natural.
Right.
So it's when we play games, we try to make it an act of leisure where we are intentional about what's going on and we are like conscious and communicating with God as we do it. So it's something where we are not trying to look past the now. We are actually very much present in the now, and that's a key component of leisure, where we are doing something outside of ourselves, but it is still oriented toward God.
And that's the other thing about leisure too, that Pieper talks about in that book, is it's not the absence of work, but the presence of rest. And true rest can only really come when you're at peace with God. So assuming that you're taking care of your responsibilities and your prayer life and your personal life and your relationships, etc., and you're setting time aside to rest and enjoy something good, that's ultimately can be a prayerful act, that you're offering up the good of a video game, a book, or a movie that you enjoy, that can help you be closer to God in the things you do. Now, that's not to say like when we're playing video games where we have like the Summa Theologiae in one hand and halos over our heads and just drinking holy waters.
We don't play Halo with halos.
No.
Hail Mary, full of grace. I'm shooting the guy in the face.
Yeah, nothing quite like that. But I mean, like, it's good to, as like an ideal, a goal to set, where you have that mindset where you're kind of training yourself to virtuously consume media, in particular video games. So hopefully you kind of steer yourself away from that mindset where you are just kind of, mindlessly consuming games for the pleasure of it.
You have to be intentional and be critical and be ordered in all that you do.
And temperate. Like, I remember growing up, like the strict half-hour limits there were on playing computer games. I know it was so hard to peel myself away from Reader Rabbit, but that's basically all I had access to growing up. But that half-hour like limits like that is like, oh man, when I'm older, I can play video games for as long as I want. And I certainly went through a time where I was just like binging video games, and it was like I would like get done and be like, "Holy crap! I just I didn't waste, but I sort of did
Yeah.
waste like 6 hours. Like, man, I could have done so much with that time."
6 hours? Amateurs.
Amateurs.
What did
I
you
haven't
say,
seen-
punk?
I haven't seen the sun in 48 hours.
Yeah. I mean, from my own perspective, like I didn't have video games growing up at home. We didn't have internet access. We didn't have any consoles or anything. Well, we did, but my mom didn't really know that. So because we weren't allowed to have them. So like I was like starved for something I wanted to have when I was a kid. And so when I would go over to my friends' houses, that would be all I do, like to the point of not spending time with my friend that I was at their house. I would just play games the whole time. So it's like when you deny it so strictly, it can like come back to, you're just like so starved for it that you want to spend all your time doing it. So that's something that I can totally relate to because I mean, I didn't have a healthy relationship with it at all. It's like it was either like when I went to my dad's house over the summer for like 2 weeks, I would play games like 14 hours a day. Like I would eat and I would sleep and play Diablo 2. And that was it. So, and then the rest of the year I didn't at all. So yeah, I mean, it certainly has the potential to suck you in if you aren't being mindful about it.
Right. And so the thing too is like if you notice you're using video games to excess, it's worthwhile to just kind of, it depends on the person too. And just because you play a lot of video games doesn't necessarily mean you're playing to excess. You have to do a little bit of soul searching and examine.
Yeah, you have to be
yourself.
honest with yourself.
Right.
But what I can say is that usually just cold turkey cutting them out of your life is not usually the right solution at all.
Right. Or with any other thing that you're like sort of addicted to. That's never a good answer. Because sometimes you might be tempted. It's like, oh man, I really have to take control of this. I'm going to go cold turkey, like do the most extreme thing. But you'd be far better off.
Don't swing the pendulum too hard the other way.
It's going to
because you come back even harder.
Yeah. So more like putting achievable limits on yourself.
Give yourself achievements.
Yeah. Virtue achievements.
Imagine if that happened.
Chastity unlocked. Sobriety unlocked. Excellence unlocked. Anyway.
Yeah. I feel like the virtue achievements would be like levels of virtue, like sobriety level 1. Like you don't just achieve or chastity. You don't just achieve a virtue someday.
You gotta grind at it.
You
gotta level up your virtue, kid.
Noobs. But yeah, it's something where you sort of over time develop a strength. It's kind of like exercising a muscle. Is the one of the most common analogies for growing in virtue. So if you notice you're playing video games to excess, maybe limit yourself to like something reasonable. Like, okay, I'm going to not play video games past a certain time.
Well, what I would say is it's almost like a spiritual plan of life where you have to like carve out time for it. You don't say, okay, when I'm done with my homework, then I get to play. Well, then
when are you done with your homework?
When are you done with your homework? When you dictate. That's entirely up to you. So if you're really trying to manage your usage of any kind of medium, I would totally suggest carving out specific time in your day. Okay, from 9 to 10, I'm going to play whatever game that I want to play. So that you ensure you have also set aside time for things that you need to be doing.
Right. So yeah, there's using video games to excess. There is also another danger that video games can pose.
Predatory monetization.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bad design. That's not good.
It's kind of related to like using video games to excess, but there are games that are like,
I don't know that that's necessarily true.
It's
well, it can
You can like play a game for an hour a day, but the monetization model of it will encourage you to buy a new thing
Well,
every
yeah.
time.
it
every time you do.
encourages that excess of play and excess of investment.
excessive spending and
It's an excess of like spending more so than it is of playing. I
Mhm.
mean, there's sometimes a correlation.
they
but-
feed off each other if you're not careful.
Yeah, to
It
an
depends
extent.
on your
To an
mindset.
extent.
Mhm.
But essentially, for those of you who might not be familiar, there's the way some games operate is that you don't have to pay for the game up front. It's
Fork
free
knife.
to play. Fork knife. Fortnite.
Yeah, as we
We
refer
call
to
it fork knife derisively because I think the game is terrible and no one should play it.
I tried
and-
it twice and I just
Sorry,
couldn't
Jonathan Blevins, but the game you play all day sucks.
stand it. yeah,
And I just don't care for shooters in the first place, so I never batted an eye twice about it.
yeah.
At any rate, so the way these games make their money is by having cosmetics that you can get that change the appearance of your character or your weapons or what have you. So essentially, it's entirely opt-in, but there's often a lot of like peer pressure with it because everyone else in a game that has cosmetics, you'll see other people with them and you'll be like, oh, that's really cool.
Oh, look at this
I better
default
get
skin
some of
noob
those.
over here.
Yeah,
the
people
cosm-
will look down on you if you don't have some of these things because you're not willing to invest in the game, so you must not be particularly good at it.
And the cosmetics are rarely ever worth in-game currency. It's always real
Yes,
world.
it's almost
dollars.
always real money.
Mhm.
And so this way of monetizing games can be dangerous if you aren't really conscious of what they're trying to do. So it's like every week you might spend $5 on a new thing. Over the course of 6 months, you'd spend a couple $100. Whereas with say a AAA game or like a really big open world title, you might only spend $60 every 6 months.
Mhm.
So you end up spending a lot more on these a lot of the time, which is why more and more companies are going towards that monetization model.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where you have the Star Wars Battlefront 2 got into
The new
like-
one,
Yeah,
to
the
be
new
clear,
one.
the EA
new
one.
Not the
At
original.
launch.
Not the
Launch.
original, the name of which shall not be spoken out of reverence.
But
one
even though
by,
it shares the exact same name.
was it BioWare? No, Pandemic made the original one. But at any rate, yeah, the most recent one by EA.
What?
It's in the game. No, it's in you. It's your problem. Anyway, we could go on about that, but they're the Disney of the video game world, basically. Except
Except
Disney.
Except more evil.
yeah,
And
well,
without the memorable
Disney is
characters,
turning into the
that's
Disney of the
Nintendo.
video game world. But at any rate, the most recent Star Wars Battlefront game, they actually, I believe, got sued because of their loot box system, where you like it was something to do with like betting odds.
Well, yeah, they basically got forced to disclose the odds of winning certain things.
because it's essentially
partic-
gambling.
and particularly since you could only unlock characters like Darth Vader very easily through that method.
Mm-hmm.
It was like still a tiny percent chance you'd get him, but you have to pay to get him.
Right. And the overall, based on like what I gathered from the outside, because I hadn't played the game myself until recently with my brother who has a PlayStation 4 or whatever. But at
Or
first,
whatever.
For whatever.
yeah. Well, the game at first was, well, people said that sort of thing just kind of ruined the experience because you had these people who were like content to basically pay to win the game, ruining the experience for people who wanted to like play it organically and upgrade and level up and all that sort of thing. But eventually they finally got the message and took that completely out of the game. And so it's actually pretty decently playable now, but yeah. You have Fortnite, you have a lot of mobile games like are specifically designed for this. Like it's a gambling machine disguised as a game.
Aren't all gambling machines
are
just
just kind of disguised as games, yeah.
Yeah. What's yeah, like I haven't played Apex Legends, but I would assume there's like some similar things going on.
Apex is a much better game in terms of, but it's still a very, I'm sure, cosmetic based because it's free to play. So
Mhm.
that's just how they be.
So, yeah, like they do. So yeah, be prudent with your money because God blesses you with resources and he expects us to be good stewards of that. So it's not to say you can't spend it on leisurely things like video games and movies and books that are good for you and you, like we talked about earlier, pursue in like a leisurely fashion. But be mindful of how you spend your money on video games in particular because they can really suck you down a really bad path. So financially speaking,
just be aware of what they're trying to do, and that it makes all the difference, really.
I mean, it's
knowing
one
is
thing,
half the battle.
yeah, it's one thing if it's a DLC pack, right? That you know that is substantial and gives you some good content.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing if it's you spend $30 over the course of 2 weeks just to get all the cool skins in Fork Knife.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there is a difference there.
Yeah.
It's just hard to tell sometimes.
The other thing about video games, I wrote in my blog about this, but they appeal to the male fantasy.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post about this. This is why I hate video games. They just appeal to the male fantasy.
Now,
Pet the dog or something.
yeah,
I love those beams.
You awake well rested.
You awake well rested. That's the real fantasy right there.
yeah. But the thing, sometimes you have to be mindful of the types of games you're playing too, and what sort of content is in there. Custody of the eyes and that sort of thing. I know Grand Theft Auto has a particularly bad reputation that way. Other games, you know, they have their character design is meant to be rather provocative. So, like we were talking about with other things before, be mindful of what you're doing, be mindful of the game. And sometimes there's like, you have to kind of find the line where a game isn't like crazy like that, where there's things like with movies and stuff where you just put on your big boy pants and don't internalize the bad, internalize the good. But when it comes to where you're just sort of kind of scraping through the bad to find little bits and pieces of good here, that sort of where, I mean, I'm really euphemizing this, but like, you know, if that game is probably not worth your time, and it might even depending on
There's a difference between speedrunning Metroid and seeing her in her underwear at the end and playing Dead or Alive.
Or like Saints Row, or you know, like GTA or what have you, games like that. Yeah. So be mindful of the type of game you're playing, and some games cutscenes are like an HBO movie, where you're just like skip, hit X, skip. But so yeah, be prudent with the sort of content you're consuming.
Which is the point of our podcast here, is to talk about being prudent about that sort of thing.
Welcome to Palladian Papists. Prudence. The end. Anyway.
Watch this.
And with that,
Yeah. Copyright strike from above. It's like copyright strike.
Isn't Spanish Flea public domain at this point?
Probably, I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't really.
Nobody's
I feel like enough YouTubers use it to the point where
It's fair use, okay? It's fair use. I only had 90% of the song.
hey,
in
we it was a cover. We did it ourselves.
Yes,
it
was
is
original.
fair use.
We added
our own
added our own
personal
creative
flair to it.
our own artistic value was added.
Hope
Our
you
own
enjoy.
lips, teeth, tongues, and vocal cords were used in the making of the atoms that compose the air we breathed ourselves. So yeah, I think we've pretty well covered
Most of the major points.
most of the major points. I mean,
But there are other things
There's-
to be talked about.
right.
Violence, for instance, but that could merit its own set of
Violence,
episodes.
well, because it's not just limited to video games causing violence. There's also like movies and other things. Like, are media responsible for leading people to take bad actions? And I guess the angle we were kind of more working towards here was like when it tempts us to be imprudent and intemperate with with games and such.
With last episode, we talked about the merits and the artistic integrity and the value that comes from the stories that can be told through video games.
Right.
This episode, we covered a lot of the design mentalities and traps developers can put you in just to get you to play more of their game without investing in real things.
Right.
I guess.
Things of
Things of actual value.
substance.
Substance.
Right. So it's less another thing you want to kind of be careful about when you're sort of examining yourself with this sort of thing is like don't focus so much on avoiding the bad, but like more along the lines of what we talked about in last week's episode where seek the good in the things you're doing. Because it can be easy to kind of get almost a sort of scrupulosity if you're not careful.
Oh yeah. I know plenty of people who are very scrupulous about their usage of media because they used to abuse it. And they're like, well, I don't trust myself to play games again. I was like, well, I mean, if you feel that that's prudent, you might have to do that. But I think for the vast majority of people, it's not really necessary. You can use video games in a healthy way, just as the same way you can use anything in a healthy way.
Yeah. It depends on your mindset and the kind of game you want you to consume and the intent and stuff. I don't know.
Right. And if there's something where you have like this addictive behavior with video games and you find it difficult to address this problem on your own, then find, somebody who can help you out, whether that be parents, spiritual director, good friends, people who can help you regulate this behavior and sort of have it master it as opposed to it mastering you.
And not a player too.
Yeah. although
multiplayer games are an excellent way to spend an afternoon.
Especially since they have the potential to be a really good communal experience.
Or they could rip your community apart.
Well, we at our house we like to play Smash Bros a lot. Except
by
we mean everybody but James.
I've never learned the game on my own. I've only been cast into the fire multiple times and left to drown.
We told you what the B button did.
Eventually, after like 5 years of like, yeah, that's a story for another time. But
anyway, it's a communal experience for us because it's a thing we do as a household, and it helps us to grow together. So yeah,
and
I crushed them.
Nathan is significantly better than the rest of us.
I'm the guy that owned the game for longest, so
yeah, there's that.
Anyway, we're about done.
I think that's
we've
good to call it
covered
out.
pretty good ground in this episode. So, all right, outro time.
Insert outro here after
after we figure out an outro. We should have a scripted outro.
Yeah,
we should, and just like absolutely ham it up.
Yeah.
But for right now, I would say just feedback's appreciated. Keep it fair,
keep it
critical, keep it kind, regardless of whether it's critical or
we do welcome
complimentary or
constructive commentary.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that you guys would if you do take the time to
listen.
Shows you care enough to help us improve. So we appreciate that. So yeah, subscribe, like, share, whatever, depends on the platform.
Do all the things.
Do all the
things. Share's a thing.
If you know somebody who you think might enjoy these dumb conversations that we have, because most of our friends don't.
Which is why we have them, and we're sharing them with you and the internet.
This is our outlet.
I mean, we've talked about them with ourselves enough. It's about time someone else heard it.
And by that, like amongst ourselves, not to ourselves. I mean, I talk to myself sometimes.
I also talk to myself.
I talk to myself all the time.
Particularly when scraping my windshield.
I'm great conversation.
Yep. All right.
Thanks for listening, friends.
God love you guys.
Thank you.
I was gonna say have a good night, but I don't know what time of day you're listening to this. So.
You don't talk about what time it is.
It's night somewhere.
Yes, on one part of the world or another. But take care. God love you guys. See you in the next. We'll be talk to you guys later.
Bye.